Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Before we get started with today's deep dive, I just want to give a huge thank you to Sheba Coffee and Tico for supporting us.
Absolutely.
Their ethically sourced blends are the perfect fuel for the kind of deep dives we do here, and today's topic is no exception.
Yeah, today we're tackling a really fascinating and controversial event.
Right, we're diving headfirst into the USS Liberty incident.
Ah, yes, the USS Liberty, 1967. It's one of those historical events that just continues to generate debate even today.
It really does. So for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with this incident, can you kind of set the stage for us?
Sure. So picture this. It's 1967. The Six-Day War is raging in the Middle East. Tensions are incredibly high. And right in the middle of this, you have the USS Liberty.
A U.S. Navy ship
Exactly, a U.S. Navy ship officially on a mission in the Eastern Mediterranean.
gathering intelligence.
Precisely. And that's where things start to get a little murky. You see, the U.S. was officially neutral in the conflict.
Right.
But having a ship gathering intel in a war zone, well, it kind of blurs the lines a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. It raises questions about what the U.S. knew and what they were really trying to find out.
Exactly. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, so then things take this really dark turn.
Mm-hmm.
On June 8th, 1967, Israeli forces launch a full-on attack on the Liberty,
Using both aircraft and torpedo boats?
and the attack was sustained. It went on for over an hour.
It was brutal. Strafing, runs napalm bombs, even torpedoes. I mean, you name it.
Yeah, the Liberty was essentially crippled, 34 American crew members were killed, and 171 wounded.
It's a tragic loss of life, and the scale of the attack, it's hard to comprehend.
Now, the official line from Israel was that it was a case of mistaken identity, a tragic error in the fog of war.
Right.
But many people, including survivors of the attack, have disputed that claim. They point to certain details like the fact that the Liberty was flying a U.S. flag.
And that it had this really unique silhouette.
Yeah, very distinct, plus the duration of the attack.
Right. I mean, if you compare the Liberty to the Egyptian ship that Israel claimed they mistook it for.
Which was their initial explanation.
Yeah, the differences are pretty stark. The Liberty was a much larger vessel, and it just had this very distinctive look.
So the big question becomes, could Israel really have misidentified the Liberty? Especially given that there were multiple flyovers by Israeli aircraft earlier in the day.
That's one of the most hotly debated points about this whole incident.
Yeah, you have some experts and analysts who argue that in the chaos of war,
In the heat of battle, tensions running high.
right, that misidentification is certainly possible.
Of course. But then you have others who point to the sustained and very deliberate nature of the attack.
The reports of the U.S. flag being visible.
Right. There are even accounts of Israeli forces targeting the life rafts.
And those details seem to contradict that whole mistaken identity claim.
They really do.
Okay, so then we have the aftermath of the attack. The U.S. conducted a naval court of inquiry.
But there were concerns about that inquiry right from the start.
Yeah, it was incredibly quick, and a lot of people felt like it was more about damage control than a real search for the truth.
There were accusations that the Johnson administration, which was already dealing with the Vietnam War and Cold War tensions, didn't want to create a larger conflict with Israel.
So they kind of swept the Liberty incident under the rug.
That's the allegation.
So this brings us to the question of a cover-up.
Mm-hmm.
Were there efforts on both the U.S. and Israeli sides to hide the truth about what really happened that day?
Well, if we look at the facts, we can see that the initial U.S. inquiry was very limited in its scope. Key witnesses, like the Liberty's captain, weren't even called to testify.
Wow.
And on the Israeli side, while they did acknowledge responsibility and apologize,
And reparations as well.
yes, but their investigations consistently focused on that mistaken identity narrative.
So for years, that was the accepted story.
Yeah.
But then in the early 2000s, some declassified documents started to emerge, including NSA intercepts of communications between Israeli forces during the attack.
And those intercepts, they really paint a different picture.
Right. They suggest that at least some Israeli personnel knew they were attacking an American ship.
We hear pilots questioning the target's identity, talking about a U.S. flag being visible. I mean, these are really significant details.
Yeah, it raises serious questions about the whole official narrative of mistaken identity.
Absolutely. It throws a major wrench into that theory. It really does make you wonder how that mistaken identity theory could even hold up.
Right. It's not just a stray comment or two either.
Yeah.
We're talking about multiple exchanges where the Liberty's identity is being discussed, where it's clear that they suspect it could be an American ship.
Exactly. And it goes beyond the NSA intercepts, too. You also have accounts from some of the Israeli pilots who were involved in the attack,
Oh, wow.
who years later came forward and actually challenged the official narrative.
What did they say?
Well, they claimed that they did recognize the Liberty as an American ship.
And they were ordered to attack anyway.
That's what they say.
Uh,
That they raised concerns, but were still ordered to attack.
wow. So if we put aside the possibility of mistaken identity for a moment, we're left with this really disturbing question. Why would Israel intentionally attack a U.S. ship, knowing the risks, the potential diplomatic fallout?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's one theory that's been put forward suggesting that Israel was trying to prevent the U.S. from getting certain information. Remember, the Liberty was a spy ship. It was equipped to intercept communications.
And some researchers believe that the Liberty might have picked up something crucial.
Like what?
Well, perhaps information about Israel's planned attack on Syria, which the U.S. opposed at the time.
Ah, I see. So if Israel was worried that the U.S. might intervene, or at least try to put pressure on them to stop the attack, silencing the Liberty could have seemed like a necessary step.
Even if it was drastic.
Right. But even so, wouldn't attacking a U.S. ship, even in the middle of a war, be a huge gamble? The potential consequences, a complete breakdown in relations with their most important ally.
It just seems so enormous.
It does. And that's why this theory has been met with a lot of skepticism. It just seems almost impossible to believe that Israel would take such a risk, knowing the potential fallout. But I think it's important to remember the context of the Six-Day War.
Right, this was an existential threat for Israel.
Absolutely. They were facing multiple enemies, outnumbered, outgunned. The stakes couldn't have been higher.
So you're saying that in that kind of pressure cooker situation where survival is on the line,
It might be easier to understand how a decision that seems irrational from the outside could actually be made.
okay, so we have this theory about Israel trying to protect sensitive information. But there are also some even darker theories out there, right? Like allegations that Israel might have been trying to cover up war crimes.
Yeah, some researchers have pointed to accounts from witnesses who claim to have seen evidence of Israeli forces committing atrocities in the area, potentially against Egyptian prisoners of war.
Oh, wow.
The theory is that Israel might have attacked the Liberty to prevent it from witnessing or reporting on these alleged crimes.
That's a chilling thought. It adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing. But we have to be careful here, right? This theory is based on pretty limited and contested evidence.
Definitely. It's important to emphasize that there's no solid proof that these alleged events actually took place, and the Israeli government has always strongly denied any involvement in such acts.
So where does that leave us?
Well, we have a range of possibilities, each with its own challenges and implications. Mistaken identity, preventing intelligence gathering, covering up war crimes. It's like we're trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces and conflicting images.
And at the center of it all is this question of intent. Did Israel knowingly attack a U.S. ship? And if so, why? These are questions that continue to haunt historians, researchers, and of course the survivors of the Liberty.
Speaking of the survivors, their accounts are incredibly powerful and harrowing.
They describe seeing the Israeli flag on the attacking aircraft and boats, feeling totally betrayed and abandoned by their own government.
Their testimony adds a human dimension to this tragedy that can't be ignored. They were there, they experienced the terror, the loss, and they've spent decades searching for answers and recognition.
And for many of them, the official explanations from both the U.S. and Israel just don't ring true. They believe there was a deliberate cover-up, an effort to silence them and protect a narrative that doesn't match their experience.
And their voices, their stories, they're absolutely crucial to understanding the full scope of this incident. It's not just about geopolitics and military strategy, it's about the human cost of conflict, the lasting trauma, and the ongoing search for truth and accountability.
It really makes you think you know about the official stories we're told.
It does. It really highlights the need to think critically, to question what we hear and dig a little deeper, especially when it comes to these events that have had such huge consequences.
Yeah, so when we take a step back and try to look at the USS Liberty incident objectively, what are some of the biggest things we can take away from all of this?
Well, I think one of the most important lessons here is that accountability matters. Even in the chaos of war, a thorough and impartial investigation, one that looks at all sides and all the evidence, is just crucial for building trust, for ensuring that justice is done.
And it seems like that's what's been missing in this case, right? Both the U.S. and Israeli inquiries have been criticized for being too narrow in scope and potentially biased.
Exactly. And that lack of a truly independent investigation has only fueled the controversy and left a lot of questions hanging. It's also a reminder, I think, that politics can get in the way of finding the truth.
Especially when you're dealing with intelligence secrets international relations, the risk of sparking a bigger conflict.
Hmm.
It makes sense that those in power would want to protect those alliances and avoid any fallout.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important for us as citizens to demand that our governments are transparent and accountable. We can't just accept the official story at face value. We need to be critical thinkers, question things, and seek out different perspectives.
And that feels like the heart of it all, right? The USS Liberty incident isn't just a history lesson. It's a warning about what can happen when power goes unchecked, about how important it is to seek out the truth, and about the need to really listen to those who've been silenced.
It's a reminder that history is often complicated and messy and open to interpretation. And we may never have a definitive answer to what really happened that day. But by continuing to explore the evidence, to debate these ideas, and to listen to the stories of those who were there, we can get closer to understanding this tragic event and the impact it's had.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank Sheba Coffee and Tico one last time for their support. Their dedication to quality and ethically sourced ingredients is a good reminder that even when things are complex and difficult, we can still find moments of clarity and connection.
This has been a really thought-provoking conversation, and I hope it inspires our listeners to keep exploring this fascinating and deeply troubling event.
Absolutely. And until next time, keep those minds curious and those questions coming.